Hello, everyone. This is Howard Fox, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series, the podcast that celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Mike Hillman is our guest today. Mike is the Photo Expeditions Director for Natural Habitat Adventures, or otherwise known as Nat Hab. And Mike, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I'm really very excited just to kind of chat with you about your work. And you are definitely up there of all the guests I've had on my show who have the dream jobs that I would like, oh, if only I could go back and wind back the hands of time. But you're here, and I'm really excited to hear more about you and your work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Howard. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, certainly don't. It's not lost on me how lucky I've had these little moments of getting to the position I'm in right now. And if I've had a lot of fun, I have to pinch myself every once in a while.
Excellent. Now, but before we get started on the work that you're doing for Nat Hab, I would love if you could, perhaps at a high level, share with our listeners a little bit about your journey. I mean, how did you get into this place that you're in? And by the way, you have a great background. And for my listeners, when you see it, that's the real deal behind Mike. I have the fake one, though I did take that picture. But that is a cool background. It's like Indiana Jones in his office. I love that. But please share a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up my background because, to be honest, like a lot of what's in this office, both on the wall behind me, but on the walls in front of me off camera, it is all about my journey. With my position right now as a photo expeditions director, I work both behind the scenes in the office doing a lot of photography related stuff, but I for a number of years working in the field as a photography guide and naturalist guide, and I still do that from time to time. And so all the stuff in here is kind of relates to either trips I've gone on or things I've learned about unique species or stuff that I've really enjoyed over the years. And now that I'm in the office, it was one of those things that I was in the field for so long that I was like, if I ever get an office, I'm going to really do it up. So that's where I had the opportunity with this space here. I grew up in Michigan and
Okay.
as a kid lived out in the woods in Michigan and had one of those childhoods that's I think are more on the rare side these days where
Okay.
mom would yell out into the woods when it was dinner time and I'd come running back after being out all day.
Right.
And I really was enamored with those show hosts like David Attenborough and Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin that were out in the field talking about animals. And I loved learning about them. And my parents can attest to the fact that, they know way more about animals than they ever thought they would because I grew up with them. But from there, I got a degree in zoology and started off in the zoo and aquarium industry. I worked for a number of organizations for a better part of 10 years. Disney's Animal Kingdom down in Orlando, the Detroit Zoo in Michigan, the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, and
Oh,
even the
wow.
Fort Worth in Texas. So I bounced around, not only taking care of animals, but also talking about them. A good portion of my job at those locations, we're that person that would go out and talk about the lion while they're feeding it, that sort of thing. So
Right.
I thoroughly enjoyed that, but I was ready to get out into the field and see the animals I've been seeing years in a zoo. I was ready to see them out in the wild. So that's where I started applying for jobs, working as a tour guide, and eventually got positions that eventually landed me with Natural Habitat Adventures. And I've been guiding with them for since 2017,
Okay.
guided trips in throughout the US in various national parks. I think 15 different national parks now, including Yellowstone, the Everglades, and a lot actually up in Alaska. I've spent
Okay.
most of the last years every summer up in Alaska working at a bear viewing camp. So I live
Oh,
there
wow.
amongst bears and go out and photograph and take guests to see the bears each and every day, which has been an absolute blast. I've also guided internationally in places like Canada for polar bears, in Churchill, Manitoba. I've worked in Greenland, as well as a special place in my heart is guiding in Australia,
Okay.
because I absolutely love Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, and his
Oh, yeah.
background. Certainly, any of the weird, unusual creatures that have some really interesting facts that are somewhat foreign to American tourists. I love talking about those particular animals. So things like the platypus, the echidna, even kangaroos, those are a blast to talk about and photograph with guests.
Okay. Very cool. Now, I do have to ask you, because you were born and raised in Michigan, you have to do the hand symbol. So I can tell you where. Let's see.
There you go. So
Okay,
I was born and raised in a little town by the name of Standish, Michigan.
okay, Standish, and I was grew up in the Detroit suburbs. And when my family and I used to go up north, typically to Mackinac Island
Mhm.
for a long weekend, Standish was actually the town we would stop off and have breakfast. It was like right
Yeah.
off I-75 there. I love it.
At least when growing up, I think we had like the most fast food places per capita of any town in Michigan because exactly that. About 2 hours from Detroit, you hit Standish. It's a perfect place to stop either on the way back down or the way up north.
Excellent, excellent. And I love the fact that you had shared your parents, especially during, well, I mentioned throughout the year, even during the winter time, they let you out of the house. Don't come back until it's dinner time and the bell rang or something.
Yeah.
Something you knew brought you back home, and we just don't do that anymore.
Hmm.
It's a lost
I
passion.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I really did enjoy that childhood. Now I'm looking back on it. It's difficult these days, of course, to try to do something like that. I've got right now a 3.5-month-old boy, and yeah, I can't quite imagine just setting him loose and then just expecting him in the next 6 hours, even when he's 10.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely the world's evolved over time, but I definitely appreciate it. I remember, especially when you bring up winter, my dad would often. Like we would tap maple trees because we're in the woods of Michigan, and he would make maple syrup every single year. And that was my chore. I couldn't come back in the house after getting off the bus at each day in like February. I couldn't come into the house until I'd grabbed all the sap buckets and brought them in first.
Oh, wow. There was I'm also reminded, just as you were sharing your background, there was a show. It was probably produced. It was produced, I believe, in the UK by BBC, but and I think there were the Quarels in Greece, or I know I've got the name wrong, but this young boy, the family was forced to kind of live in Greece because they had lost a lot of their money. But the young boy basically was out there every day exploring and collecting
Mhm.
animals. And as you
Yeah.
were sharing that, I was curious, as you were lifting up rocks and seeing what's underneath, which is a metaphor I use with my coaching clients, by the way. Did you collect animals and keep them in the house or in the barn or?
Absolutely. I mean, I as a kid, I brought home snakes and turtles and frogs, all sorts of stuff. I mean, that was one of my pastimes as a kid. I shudder to think about it now, but I would literally just take a net, and go to the various ponds in the woods near my house. And I would just catch the turtles and the frogs and the fish, then release them. And then the next day I'd go back to the same pond and just catch the same frogs and turtles and release them again. But it definitely provided me experience to kind of understand the natural world around me and get an idea of just being out there looking for creatures, and I really appreciate my parents just letting me kind of have that experience because it's very much tied into what I do today. I mean, looking for wildlife is practically half of what I get paid for to do is go out into the
Mhm.
field and find things that would be otherwise difficult to find. And all those experiences started off very early in childhood of just going out, finding a bird, finding a turtle, finding a salamander under a log. Those are all things that I did then and still do today.
I love it. Now, how did you land this dream job of
Mhm.
and may perhaps photo expeditions director? I mean, that's your title today. A lot of jobs we have to start doing the grunt work. And so
Yeah.
what was that meeting of opportunity and timing?
Right.
What was that job with the Nat Hab like?
Like, I'm sure you've heard before people talk about kind of lucked into circumstances or the timing was just right. And I think there certainly is those elements to what I do, but I think a lot of it has to do with persistence and going back, getting the right experiences and keep trying again. When I was working in the zookeeping field, I was looking for that moment of like, okay, I'm ready to get out in the field. To be honest, I didn't know that guiding, going out in the field, taking people out in the field was a profession in college. It wasn't
Mhm,
until much later in my career as a zookeeper that I realized that was a job that you could get
mhm.
paid for. And so once I started realizing that, I was actually, and still I'm a bird watcher and a
Mm,
birding guide from time to time. And so I tried leveraging that moment of like, okay, I'm a fairly decent bird watcher in Texas. Can I start bird guiding? So I wasn't even thinking specifically photography or just kind of this international guiding, but could I do that? And so I was looking at a lot of companies online, and unfortunately, a lot of these types of companies don't post jobs like you
right.
would expect with other professions. It's a lot about what connections
Mhm.
you have, what experiences you've had, and then you can kind of put yourself out there. And I was just emailing those companies cold and just being like, "Hey, do you have a position for me? Here's my experience." Understandably, a lot of their guides were men in their 50s and 60s, and they had been professors for decades prior to this in ornithology, or had been world travelers since the age of 5 kind of thing. And so I definitely wasn't getting I didn't have that experience to be able to get those positions. I actually cast my net a little bit further to see if there were companies that weren't just doing bird watch guiding, and that's where I found companies like Nat Hab. Natural Habitat Adventures actually does post their jobs online, and so I was able to
Okay.
apply for positions. But up to that point, my experience was completely zookeeping. I had not done a lot of international travel and not done a lot of guiding. So I got one of those standard emails back that was saying, "Hey, thanks for your application. You might want to try these job boards because we get a lot of applications every year, and it's a fairly competitive
Right.
position." So I didn't get a job with them initially, and it took me a few more years of building up that guiding experience, working with other companies, doing a little bit here, a little bit there, before I finally applied again a couple of years later. Now that I had some of that experience, and I lucked out in that I was given an interview, which was 2 interviews over the phone, and they actually flew me out, and it was a group interview with I think about 17 other candidates, and we spent a
Okay.
weekend getting scenarios and talking about how to solve this and showing our presentation skills and our
Mhm.
guiding experience, all that kind of stuff that eventually evolved into guiding with Nat Hab. And then over the years, did a lot of what I talked about previously of going out to Australia and Greenland and Canada and all over the US. And now that I'm kind of settling in, I've got a wife and a small child. I wanted to get a house at a
Mhm.
home base. And so look to work in the office and just kind of considering I have this relationship with Nat Hab, I just put it to them like, "Hey, I'd love to settle down if there's any office positions that open up that make sense for me." And that's where I got a message from someone that I worked with closely saying, "Hey, you should really apply for this photo director position." And the rest is history.
Okay. Very cool. Now, as you have pursued uh, natural habitat adventures and you were persistent, which as a coach who does a lot of career coaching, I admire that. You have a track record, so you were able to market yourself and your brand and what you had to offer. Is the path into an organization like NatHab, is it very similar for others who might have preceded you or are going to be coming after you, having the science background, the biology, zoology, ornithology, all the ethologies, paleontology, whatever. But do you have to have that background? Is that kind of a one of the entry criteria?
Yeah, I think it can certainly help, but there's a few different avenues that guys like myself have gotten into a position like this. I think realistically, the strongest thing you need to have, and that's where you're building up that experience with other positions, is customer service, especially in
Mhm.
our style of guiding. I mean, the goal is for our guests to enjoy themselves, have a good time, do it safely. And so those are all things that fall squarely under the idea of customer service. So that's the
Mhm.
big one. That's the one the harder to teach because that takes years of experience and being in these kinds of situations. And I think the other biggest thing is it's not necessarily that you have to have a degree in zoology or some sort of sciences or necessarily related to where you're visiting. I think the biggest skill set is understanding how you learn. I
Mhm.
think going through college and then the years after that, I've developed this idea of how I best learn so that when I'm presented with a location that I've traveled to somewhat, but I'm haven't up to that point considered myself an expert in that area to be able to take 12 people behind me down a trail, understanding how to use your resources online and talk to other guides to get the information that I need and then cram that in so that I'm understanding of the location and then can be able to relay that to the guests. Because with Nat Hab and a lot of tour companies at our level, it's not just a matter of like, you pull up at the bus, you let the folks out and they enjoy the viewpoint. The goal is for you to be there to be able to guide that experience, to talk about the location that you're at, to give them the history, to give some of the natural history of the plants and animals that they see. And of course, from my perspective as a photography guide, be able to now use my camera, their camera, and talk about how best to capture that scene, to capture that subject. And so those are all things that stem back to just understanding how I best learn so that I can get myself ready to be able to take guests to a location.
Okay. Now, you kind of alluded to it as earlier, and there's a lot of touring inside the continental U.S.,
Mhm.
Canada. Where are some of the worldwide destinations in Australia, Asia? But are there destinations that are like they're the go-tos every year? There are hundreds of potential guests that want to experience a particular location year after year. And are there some locations, and I think I can answer part of that question just given the nature of global warming, like Greenland or the
Mm.
Arctic. But are there the go-tos every year, and are there some new up and coming destinations where that photographer, that amateur photographer or professional just wants to get out there and experience?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think with natural habitat adventures, you basically, to understand where we go, you just sit back and think, what are those iconic animals? What are those iconic natural nature experiences around the world? And that's what we're thinking about when it comes to planning trips. So, I mean, we've got trips to a variety of places in Africa, places like Botswana and Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa for those safari experiences, going out and photographing lions and leopards and giraffes and rhinos. And then for us, one of our iconic destinations is to see the polar bears in Churchill, Manitoba. There's no
Mhm.
place outside of Churchill where you can have such a close and interesting experience with these polar bears. You're out on these monster truck like vehicles called polar rovers. It looks like a monster truck and a bus had a baby. And you drive out into the tundra, and these polar bears are just wandering around along the edge of the Hudson Bay because they're waiting for the freeze up, which happens every fall. And
Okay.
so we're there basically watching those polar bears that were inland during the summer. They're coming to the edge of the sea on the Hudson Bay, waiting for the ice to freeze up, and we get to see them hang out as they watch the weather change. And of course, and as you talk about things like climate change, that's very much a destination where it's being affected. Exactly when the freeze up happens, how long the freeze up happens, and how that relates to kind of polar bear conservation over time. It's changing. We're seeing that the sea ice is taking longer to freeze. And then when it does freeze, it thaws out very, very quickly. And that's having drastic changes to the polar bear population, not
Mhm.
only in Churchill, but of course, across the whole of the northern latitudes. When we talk about kind of new destinations, places that are somewhat up and coming, um, one that comes to mind to me that I think was always kind of a dull roar, but is really starting to gain some ground is the Pantanal, which is southern wetlands in Brazil. And so everyone thinks about Brazil going to the Amazon, but in southern Brazil, we have the Pantanal, which are these wetland habitats, kind of akin to the Everglades, but a little bit different geologically. But the big draw there, something that's changing a lot over the years, is the jaguar sightings are much more frequent than they used to be. Can almost guarantee them on our trips these days, which is fantastic because I remember growing up and watching those shows with David Attenborough and Jeff Corwin, and they would talk about how rare a jaguar sighting would be in this dense jungle. And back then, jaguar researchers may hope to see one once in their career. But now, in those areas, the jaguars are much more accustomed to people and understand that these tour groups that are going through those areas aren't there to harm them or mess with them. And so those boats just kind of drift down the river while they go about their day. And so you get these experiences of, we've got videos on our website of jaguars just jumping off of the bank to capture a caiman, a crocodile, while our boats just drifting by. And so they're getting these National Geographic type experiences right in front of them because the jaguars have just become accustomed to these people in this region. So that for me is one of the biggest places that I wanted to go personally as a photographer is because of how much that's changed over the years.
Okay. Given the time you have been with Nat Hab and the various experiences and tours you've been on, have you ever found yourself in a place where things didn't go as expected, or in a good way, or perhaps in a not so good way? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about expedition travel, every single welcome presentation that I do, where we have a dinner and we talk about the trip and what to expect, what to plan for, there's one slide that I call the adventure guarantee, which is I guarantee the adventure that I just told you about is not what we're going to do.
Okay.
Because there's invariably going to be changes. I think a big part of my role as a photo expedition leader is to understand how to put out those fires, how to fit those puzzle pieces just together to create a great experience. That's kind of the agreement between the guests and myself. We're agreeing that I'm going to give you a great experience. It may not be necessarily what you were expecting, but it'll be a fun and enjoyable trip at the end of the week. And a good example of that actually has to do with one of my favorite trips to lead with. Natural Habitat Adventures, which is the ultimate Alaska photo expedition. And
Mm.
so this is a trip that basically I call the Alaska sampler. It does the interior and the mountains, it does the coastline, and it adds in the bears. So it's a little bit of everything. And so that trip starts in Denali National Park, and then
Mhm.
it continues on down to Kenai Fjords National Park, which is on the coastline in Seward, Alaska, and
Mhm.
then finishes off in Katmai at Brooks Falls, oftentimes. And that trip is a lot of fun because you get to see so much of Alaska over the course of about 2 weeks. And the particular trip I'm thinking of, the day before our welcome dinner started, I hear through the grapevine that there was a landslide in Denali National Park that had taken out a portion of the road, which is the only road that goes 90 miles from the park entrance to the interior where our lodge happens to be.
Uh,
And so I called up the lodge and was like, "Hey, can you give me any updates? What does it look like for my group going through?" And they're like, "Oh, that's not going to work out. The National Park Service is evacuating us for the time being while they figure out what this closure is going to look like." Fast forward to today, they're still working on that road closure. So it's been a few years now. But that was that moment of like, what do I do next? And so between my own skill set as well as calling the office, the trip planners, and some of our on the ground staff, what we ended up doing was actually one of my favorite trips from kind of changing the experience up. Because while we had originally planned to go into the interior of Denali, that wasn't an option now. What could we do as an experience for those first few days that we were planning to be there, and then eventually catch up with our original itinerary, which would be heading down towards Kenai Fjords? And what we ended up doing was fantastic is we got on a bus and drove north above the Arctic Circle, which wasn't something that was part of the trip. So a bunch of our guests weren't planning on it being checking off that bucket list item of going above the Arctic Circle, but we ended up doing that. Then
mhm.
we stayed in a very small remote town where we then drove up to the Brooks Range, which is probably the almost northernmost we've ever had a Nat Hab trip in Alaska. And when we overnighted there, we had the opportunity to see the Northern Lights, which is also not something that we add
See,
to our itinerary usually.
I that's like on my bucket list.
Yeah, yeah, it was one of those experiences like, well, if we just gone to Denali, we would have seen some cool stuff, but like we checked off the Arctic Circle, the Northern Lights, and we even actually tacked on a couple of flights so that we could keep the speed of the itinerary and get back down to Kenai Fjords. So we had these beautiful small plane flights over the northern latitudes of Alaska. It was
Right.
fantastic. And so that was one of those moments where we pivoted and created an entirely new experience, and our guests had a fantastic time doing that. And on top of that, we lucked out because we caught the train from the park entrance of Denali and then took that south to catch up with our itinerary. The Alaska Railroad, a very famous railroad line
Oh, yeah.
throughout the US.
Yeah.
And we had bluebird skies that day. So we got to see the Denali in all of its glory as we rode by on the train, which so they still checked off that box because Denali is a hard mountain to see on a good day. So I'm really happy with the trip turned out.
I'm like, I could like pinch myself. I should have gone and looked for my Denali photo because years ago, and I'm a solo traveler. I don't typically go with groups, and I want to talk a little bit about that as well. But I took the Alaska Railroad from Anchorage up to Denali, then to Fairbanks, and I remember people
Oh,
said, "Howard, now don't be disappointed. You may not see Denali." And it's like every day there's Denali in all its
Oh,
splendor.
fantastic.
And it was what a wonderful experience. And I did see my first bear from afar lounging out in the field, just taking a nap after
Oh,
having
great.
eaten all those berries. But what is it like? I don't know the best way to phrase this. As an accomplished photographer, as a photo guide, and taking people out in some exotic locations, giving them the experience, this wonderful experience. How do you balance that from the folks that maybe have this tendency? I just want to do my own thing. I want to go on the tour, but I want to do my own thing. And I would imagine too, maybe there's some benefit to doing things on your own, but there's a huge benefit I could see just being in a group with an organization like Nat Hab.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about benefits of group travel, one of the biggest and easiest ones is you get the trip laid out in front of you, and all you have to do is show up when we tell you to, and then eat the food when we put it in front of you, and then go to bed and then start the next day. So there's a lot of that headache that comes with solo travel and planning your own itinerary. And something like Alaska is a great example of this, is it's very difficult to get all those puzzle pieces to connect. And certainly in the case of a trip like the one I was just talking about, the what ifs, if something goes wrong, the weather changes. Alaska is fantastic for rain delays and fogs and these significant events where you're now like, okay, what am I going to do with the next 2 days because this flight's not going to go? And that's where having a group like Natural Habitat Adventures basically solving all those things while you're having a drink at the bar, and then the guide comes in and we're like, hey, here's our new plan, and then we get going. So there's fantastic benefits from that perspective. Additionally, from a photo expedition perspective of as a photographer, it's actually great to go with other photographers because hey, you just get the camaraderie of someone who's like-minded like you. A lot of photographers that are interested in what we are of wildlife photography may not necessarily be connected with others in their local community, in their own little friend circles. You might be known as the photographer and you kind of feel like you're alone on this island. But going out on these trips with other photographers, fantastic. You get to talk to each other. Oftentimes you'll see someone else on the trip that has the same kind of camera, or at least the same make. So has a Sony or has a Canon or a Nikon. And so you'd be able to bounce ideas off each other, ask questions, get the right settings for this experience, which is great. So I absolutely love those kind of experiences when you're with the group for that, let alone like, I can't tell you how many Nat Hab trips I've run where we have friend groups that met on a previous trip and now they just travel together because you can kind of
Okay.
guarantee like at least two or three of the people in this group are people I already like, and we're going on the next trip and the trip after that. But yeah, from a solo perspective, like if you want to do these trips, but you are that person that needs that time, what does that look like to go on a group trip? Well, I, as a guide, having an opportunity for those guests to like just step aside and be like, hey, listen, like I don't do a lot of group trips. I like my solo time. How can I manage that out here in the field? And every single guide will work with you on that as best they can. I mean, one of the easiest way we do that is um, if it's an experience where like I was just at the Grand Canyon on Friday last week, we can send a group out to photograph this rim of the Grand Canyon. And certainly some of us will be set over here in what we consider the best spot for the photo. But if you wanted to wander off on your own, just let us know and you can hang out a little bit further away from the group and kind of get your solitude in a place like Grand Canyon National Park. That's a great way to do that. Going on your own hikes, if the opportunity presents itself, those are also good. Just making sure you know your time and when you can get back. And then I've even had something as simple as oftentimes we do group dinners where all of us get together in one spot and then we share stories from the day or from previous trips. But I'm more than happy for a guest to be like, listen, I'd love to have the night to myself. Can I eat dinner at a table by myself at the restaurant? And like, absolutely go for it. Even like couples, I'll do that. They'll book this trip with a group, but they still want that romantic experience. Maybe they're celebrating their anniversary. And so there'll be 1 or 2 nights where we'll just book them a table, just the two of them at the restaurant we happen to be at and the rest of the group somewhere else. So there's still those opportunities for solitude throughout a group experience. You just advocate for yourself, talk to your guide, and they'll happily solve
Okay.
those requests.
Okay. I'm also curious in taking your clients out. on trips, and there's a lot of experiences to be had. How do you see their growth in terms of appreciating nature and being able to capture it visually with your eyes and then with the camera, but also realizing you're a part of this big ecosystem. There's stewardship, there's conservation, there's also the ethics of, when you're trying to capture an animal that you've always wanted to get that photo of, the jaguar. Uh, but how do you not intrude on that wildlife space? But so appreciate that. So you're appreciating the wildlife, but you're also appreciating nature. How do you see these types of excursions helping to have that message stick about needing to take care of something bigger than ourselves?
Yeah, I think the act of going out into these places and opening yourself up to these experiences is a huge stepping point towards that question. Because you as a guest or someone as a photographer, you've seen photos of bears, you've seen photos of jaguars and tigers and lions, but as you probably know, it's a huge thing to be able to be in that moment and then have that experience. So you're not just seeing the photo in a book or a magazine, you're being able to either get the photo or just see that scene. Bears up in Alaska is one of the biggest ways that I've seen growth in guests. Um, they've maybe wanted to see bears, wanted to have that Alaska experience for years, and finally book a trip with a company like us. We take them up to this bear camp where they spend 3 nights at our camp in amongst bear habitat. We have a private inholding within Lake Clark National Park. So we're literally inside the national park along the bear habitat. And so we have bears going right by our camp all the time.
Oh, wow.
And until you get there, like the guests see the pictures, even what we can market, and it doesn't quite hit them until like they're standing there and a bear just walks by and they look at me like, this is real. This is bear camp. And I was like, that's why we named it that. It's such a unique experience to be able to be that close to what in a lot of places, and certainly in the media, it's a species that's been vilified. I mean, they're animals to be respected, don't get me wrong. And certainly in places like Yellowstone and parts of the Rockies, where we have these articles and news stories come out of bear attacks and dangerous situations. Those bears there have been around a lot of people and people that weren't necessarily understanding how to coexist with those bears, how to be in bear country safely, worrying about their trash and accidentally feeding the bears, getting too close. All those kinds of things lead to some pretty unfortunate circumstances. But in places in Alaska that we go to, the bear viewing industry has been much more responsible in how they interact with those bears, making sure that we're cleaning up after ourselves, making sure that we're not leaving food behind. We don't even bring food out into the bear environment. It stays within our buildings and within our kitchen. And then understanding, like going with a guide so that the guide can basically translate the bear language of what they're doing, how their body's moving, where they want to go, and making sure we're putting ourselves in a respectful place. All that leads to an experience where you can have a bear walk past you 15 feet from your camera. And it's a perfectly safe situation because of all that history of bear interactions in Alaska that's led to that moment. And understanding that you've heard of this bear being this big, dangerous creature, and now you see this bear in its habitat doing what it's doing, ignoring you completely while it fishes for salmon or eats sedges in the meadows. It's a very powerful experience. And I love seeing that look back from guests after that bear walks by. They look at me and that moment of like, this is real. Was amazing. This is everything I'd hoped for and more. As a guide, as a photography guide, that's one of my absolute favorite experiences, is to see that change of scary bear to bear that's respectful and can be left to its own devices and be very important to the ecosystem.
I love it. What types of experiences are you seeing growth in when folks are coming out onto these types of excursions and having these experiences? Because we've got 24 hours in a day, we have a variety of interest, and besides these new exotic locations, are there also different types of photography that are coming into the into your library of offerings, and
Yeah.
perhaps things you hadn't thought about doing before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in general, over the course of the trip, our goal as photo expedition leaders is to go out there and be able to teach our guests how to get the photos that they're hoping for. And so seeing those moments of their maybe early photos in the first couple of days and then seeing what they're getting at the last couple of days, it's fantastic to see that growth. And certainly one of my favorite things, and one of the areas where I see a lot of growth in our guests, is with astrophotography, which is
Hmm.
photography at night after the sun is set and we're getting the stars or the Milky Way or the aurora. I mean, that's, even though that's a relatively easily accessible thing for our photography guests to get back home, depending on how far out into the wilderness they live. Because, of course, city folks won't get a lot of stars, but can still practice a little bit. But you don't, when you're at home, you don't have the time. You don't think to be like, well, I'm just going to stay up till 2 a.m. and see what kind of stars are out and get some photos. And so when we're out in these very, very cool places where we have these beautiful silhouettes of mountains or boreal forest, and then you can sit there and get that shot of the night sky, of the Milky Way cresting over top of the Grand Canyon, or something to that effect. It's a really cool experience. And I love walking guests through those settings because there's a couple technical hurdles you got to achieve with your camera. But once you've figured that out, it's like unwrapping a Christmas present, an astro photo, because you take the photo and you don't really know what the camera is going to get until that image pops up on the screen after it's done. Because you're
Right.
holding that shutter for maybe half a second to 15 seconds, depending, or 30 seconds, depending on the image you're hoping to get. And so you see that pop up and you're like, wow, that's what the camera sees of the experience, and hopefully capturing a little bit of what you see of when we're in these dark sky places of just millions upon millions of stars and the Milky Way, or in northern Canada, the aurora just dancing across the
Mhm.
screen. It's a magical experience, and I love taking guests on those kinds of nights.
Very cool. Yeah, I don't know if I shared this with you when we had our discovery call, but one of the goals and objectives when I moved from Chicago to Las Vegas, where I live now, is I wanted to get out into the desert and go car
Yeah.
camping. And the dark sky photography, the astrophotography, was on my list of things to accomplish. And one of my first episodes was with a very accomplished dark sky photographer, Peter Zelinka. He's up in Staircase Escalante.
Yeah, that's a
And
great spot.
I just, I mean, I adore it, but I'm not a 2 a.m. in the morning kind of guy. I need my sleep.
Yeah.
But one last question, and then I would love if you would gift us with a little tour of the Natural Habitat Adventure website. It's the advent of this guy, the smartphone. In fact, you can
Yeah,
see
yeah.
that's my photo right there.
Oh, yeah, there you
Ding!
go, some Milky Way. Nice.
It was there. It was there. But do you got people coming out? Forget the camera, the Canon, what's it? The mirrorless camera, and I can't
Yeah,
afford that. The big lens, and all they've
yeah.
got is this bad boy right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the age-old quotes of photography is the best camera is the one you have with you.
Yeah.
That's always the question with the guests is what camera lens should I bring? Well, how expensive of equipment should I have? And then on in their everyday day life, they're not going to be bringing the 20-pound camera that's costing $15,000. They're going to have something like their smartphone. I will say this is a camera case on a smartphone.
I
Um,
love it. I love it.
yeah, but the smartphone is fantastic. I'll never forget when we speak about night sky photography, aurora photography. It wasn't until I think the iPhone 11 that they could properly do night sky photography. And so for years, I've been telling guests, like, don't bring your phone. You're not going to capture the aurora. Like, you need to have a proper camera. If you don't, like, I'll get the pictures and give them to you. That's not a problem. And then someone with an iPhone 11, when they had the night sky mode, dark sky mode, got the picture. And I was like, oh, this is like, it just, every single year you're getting these new settings that are making the photography in these devices so much better. And so it's oftentimes the moment of like, okay, you can get the photo of this experience. And I still highly recommend one of these bigger cameras if you're the kind of person that has a passion for a hobby like photography, or maybe even professionally. But for those that are just going in to see a place, to see the wildlife, to experience this travel, a phone I think is fantastic because it's very user friendly. It's pretty easy to get the settings down to kind of elevate your photography with smartphone, and you don't have all that extra equipment in the way, which can sometimes detract from the experience if you're not very familiar with one of these bigger cameras like my Sony A1 here. And so I love these smartphones for that kind of photography to get the experience, capture it, and then be able to put it back in your pocket and experience it for yourself. I mean, so many times I'm looking through the viewfinder for some of my favorite experiences I've ever had
Mhm.
versus putting the camera down. So it's nice to have that. In addition, video is much more difficult on a system like this. And so video is a great way to capture that experience. And so again, smartphone's fantastic. We
Okay.
oftentimes will do on some of our tours these helicopter flights over a landscape. Like we just did one in Zion National Park that I was a part of. And we recommend to our guests, and like, unless you're very familiar with your camera, because helicopter photography from a helicopter is its whole other ball game, just to get some video with your phone and it'll capture the experience almost just as well. So yeah, smartphones definitely have changed the game a little bit, but not completely for the bad. I think it offers the opportunity for a lot of people that wouldn't be photographers to be so out on these
Okay.
trips.
Okay. Now, I was hoping not to go down this path, but I have to because I consider myself a decent amateur. On a scale of 1 to 10 as an amateur, I'm probably a 5 or 6 compared to others who
Mhm.
I know are like Peter Zelenka or somebody like yourself. If I have a camera and I'm comfortable with it, and I just want a good I wanna bring one all-purpose lens because I don't want I mean, I love birding, so I love that big lens, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
However, it's, when you're hiking with it day after day, it gets to be a very heavy piece of equipment. Is there, like, an optimal go-to in terms of you've got the
Mhm.
camera body, but here's the ideal lens if you bring one lens? Or does this and I guess another loaded question, does it depend where you're going as
Oh, I
well?
mean, absolutely. I think as a photographer, like what lens you bring, if you're only picking one, depends a lot on what you expect to get.
Okay.
When you are traveling to a spot, when you're booking a trip, as a photographer, I'm thinking of the pictures that I'm going to get when I go there, and so that kind of influences right from the get go what kind of lenses I want to bring because that will determine like, oh, if I want that head portrait of a bear, I'm probably not going to go with my wide angle. Like I need something a little bit of zoom and keep myself safe. So that certainly can influence it. But I will say you can still answer this question to a certain degree. A good lens that's all purpose, I think, is something on the order of a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Most camera manufacturers these days have a lens somewhere sitting within that realm. And the reason why I like that is at 70, you can capture most landscapes. If they're these big landscapes kind of off in the distance, I'm thinking mountains, a lake, something like that. And then it also is a fairly decent zoom to be able to capture your fellow travelers. You might get kind of those headshots or chest up shots. So, I mean, if you're traveling with a friend or a spouse or something like that, you're going to want a few of those photos of the person that is traveling with. And then that range out to 200 is really good for some reasonable wildlife shots. Of course, as you mentioned, you always, as a photographer, want that little extra reach. You want the 400 millimeter, you want the 600 millimeter to get the eye of the bear, not just the face. And so you could always want for more, but I think 70 to 200 is a good one lens. Usually for my guests, what I recommend are two lenses. I recommend the 24 to 70,
Mhm.
which is fantastic for landscapes and people. And then I recommend something in the 100 to 400 range. So the 70 to 200 would kind of fit some of that.
Okay.
Because that's your wildlife, that's your zoom in lens for something that's off in the distance, and then you get your landscape lens. Two lenses usually works for almost every situation. A big telephoto for wildlife, and then a landscape lens, and you're good to go.
Okay. Very good. I love it. Well, thank you for that, and I just couldn't leave this conversation without kind of, talking about the camera.
Oh, no
Now
worries.
I
It's one
would
of my most common questions. Is just what lens should I bring? So I'm happy
I
to answer.
It's every once in a while when I get my podcast episodes evaluated for contest and people want to know the stories that are being told, but you know, there's the question everybody asks. It's like you talk to a leader of a company, what keeps you up at night? Well, everybody asks that, so come up with a different question. In
Yeah,
any
yeah.
case, I'm going to share my screen now. I'd love if I know our episode is going over the time that I said is going to be. I hope you're okay with that. I think we're both on either the Pacific time zone or maybe you're an hour behind me and or ahead of me in Tucson, but so I apologize. But I'm going to share my screen right now, and I would love it if you could take us on a quick tour of the website. So the
Yeah. Oh,
miracle
scroll
modern
bears. I love it.
technology. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's on my
So
list.
yeah, this is nathab.com. Our website, I should say, Natural Habitat Adventures is a conservation minded travel company. So we're always thinking about how we're going to a place, how we're doing it ethically, how we can help conserve the places that we see, conserve the animals that we see. And we have a partnership. You can see in the upper left corner, the logo right there. We've had a partnership for a number of years now with World Wildlife Fund. And
Mhm.
so that's super important to us because not only do we donate some of our proceeds towards World Wildlife Fund, we also talk to our guests about WWF and its projects around the world. And then even our guests, we're very proud of as they go home and then oftentimes they donate themselves. And so we have this huge impact on conservation just by traveling to these locations, providing these kind of hopefully life-changing experiences for our guests and talking about all these beautiful stories of the wildlife, of conservation and travel in general. So one of the areas I want to spend some time with is the trips section. So if you go on the top right there, you click on that, that brings us through all of our various locations that we go to around the world, which is just about everywhere you can think of when you think of these big iconic spots and these big iconic wildlife. Howard, if you want to click on photo expeditions, which is that photographer on the right side, about 3 down.
I can do this. Okay, there we go.
So
Whoa.
I sit as photo expeditions director is very much squarely in this page. Is if you scroll down, you'll see our trips, our trip leaders, and kind of our promise to our guests is this idea that we're going to these places that have unique access, places that are further afield. We've got fantastic photography leaders, and of course, we're always thinking about conservation. But we have a variety of trips that are specifically designed for photographers in mind. A lot of them are the same destinations that we take our regular guests, but these are trips that are oftentimes in the prime time of the year for the best photos. Maybe add extra days. We, of course, have a photography leader specifically, and then additional activities that are centered around photography. So maybe we won't spend as much time at the museum, but we're going to spend more time in the field to get the photo of the elephant in, say, Botswana.
By the way, these two photos, the Northern Lights and that elephant, that is totally on top of my list of
Oh,
yeah, you can only
absolutely.
see too many YouTube videos.
Yeah, yeah. So if you want to scroll down, I think there's going to be an ultimate Alaska with a bear staring at you right in the face. That's my photo, my trip that I lead
Oh, there we
right
go.
next to the gorilla. Yeah. So if you want to click on that one, you can see here,
Wow.
always have like this big stellar photo of kind of what to expect on the trip, what you can experience. You're scrolling down and learning about the trip. There's on the left side, kind of details the itinerary, accommodations and prices and info, of course, dates you can go, and as well as a lot of ancillary material so you can kind of understand the experience you're going to have out there. And of course,
Okay.
one of my big parts of my job is actually putting together these carousels you see here of all these different photos that are representative of the trip and the excellent work that our photo expedition leaders and even our guests get those photos out in the field. So yeah, that's my photo of the glacier, of the whale, of the sea otter. This is a fun trip to do. I thoroughly enjoy it.
I love it.
Um,
How do you when I was on a cruise, actually it was like literally last year at this time, it was with Uncruise Adventures, a small ship. We went up into the Glacier Bay National Park. I was able to podcast from the boat, the guests as well as the crew. And being able to go up there and have this experience, what is it? The I took a lot of pictures. A lot of the guests had their cameras. but then the crew were always had their cameras with them, and they were taking pictures. And I'm
Mhm.
sure while we were up drinking at the bar, somebody's going through the photos and doing some editing. Do you do any edits for the guests before when they come back from the cruise? Like, here's a terabyte of photos for you. Enjoy. You know.
It Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I love to do, both for the trips I lead that are photo specific, and then I also lead some trips that are what we call our classic nature journey, where it's not necessarily photographers is the experience. And what we'll oftentimes do at the end of the trip, and maybe when we get back, because we can oftentimes have very busy schedules out in the field, is we will take some time to edit the photos that we got, both of the guests, as well as we
Okay.
try to sneak over the shoulder of the guest to get that photo of the moose crossing through Wonder Lake in Denali
Okay.
National Park. And those photos, we have an internal system called our adventure portal, where our
Oh,
guests, that's where you fill out your forms and pay your outstanding balance. But it's also an opportunity for you to upload photos to. And
okay.
so guides upload photos. And so you'll get anywhere between 15 to, I usually upload 40 high quality photos of the experience that our guests are able to download and share with their friends and family. So
Okay.
that's integral part of our trips is our guides uploading to that portal and giving our guests some photos. And of course, the guests themselves, they can upload photos and be able to kind of show the pictures they got to their fellow travelers, which I love seeing. As a photography guide, we go out to these places and I have my idea of what I've been seeing every single time I visit Denali National Park or
Hmm.
Katmai. To be able is to bring 12 other creative people, photographers into that place and see what they get. It's one of my favorite things to do at the end of a trip is to scroll through their photos because they see stuff that I've never seen because they're approaching it from a completely different perspective. Every artist as a photographer has their own unique eye, and I
Sure.
absolutely love seeing what they come back with.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I know there's just a lot here on the website. I do see you also have an e-newsletter,
Hmm.
and you can request a catalog. And then if you are a part of the Nat Hab family, folks that have gone on the excursions, you have your portal access.
One other
Anything
thing I
else?
think I'd love to point out, actually, Art, if we got the time, is if you go up to
Sure.
resources
Sure.
and click on Daily Dose of Nature, which is the second one down there.
Whoa.
So this is something that we've used to do, and a lot of companies will do. Is we used to do these maybe every Tuesday or once a month. We would do a presentation about a location that we're visiting, so the guests could learn a little bit more about it. But born out of COVID in 2020, we wanted to give guests and just viewers, if you will, more of a daily experience of a trip, of a topic, or something like that. And so now today, 5 days a week, just about every single week of the year, we do these webinars. Sometimes they're related to a specific trip. Sometimes they're conservationists coming on and talking about their particular experience and the work that they're doing. Sometimes they're a photographer talking about photo tips on how to take photos in your backyard or how to take photos of elephants or anything in between. And so even if you're a listener that probably won't be going on one of our trips for whatever reason, this is a way that you can engage with awesome, these awesome guides, these awesome travelers, and learn about these locations that we go to. Not only just to learn how to travel there, but just to learn about the science and the nature of these fantastic wildlife and locations.
I love this. I love this. And I would imagine there's just so many stories to be told and gathered just on these excursions. And I love this. Fantastic.
Yeah, you can. It's completely free to sign up for the email that goes out every Sunday with the next 5 webinars each week. And then what you're scrolling through right now, Howard, though, that's our whole library. And so if you're coming in not hearing about NatHab previously, you can click on one of these and see all the webinars we've done about Antarctica and watch ones over the years that we've put together.
Fantastic.
I
Well,
mean,
we will
yeah, hours upon
definitely,
hours of footage.
well, something that beats watching videos of people breakdancing under the in downtown Las Vegas. So
Yeah, exactly.
I love this. Fantastic. Well, thank you for taking us on the tour of the website. This is in I just like the need to save my pennies because you're tugging at my heartstrings here. Lots of great destinations and experiences here. I have seen that shot before, though not in Antarctica, but looks like the eight whales waving at you. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to come back to you and I, and thank you again. I really appreciate you gifting us with that tour, and we're going to provide the backlinks on our show notes so folks can check it out and learn and kind of whet their appetite for wherever their next adventure is. I am curious, Mike, you've had a great career. I mean, I'm quite a bit older than you, or at least I will, unless you're incredibly young for your age. But I am curious, though, in terms of your aha moment of when you look back and you kind of pinch yourself like, oh my God, I get to do this. What has been one of your aha moments that you could think about
Mhm.
and share?
I think for me, I've had a lot of those moments over the years in various places that I have to pinch myself and be like, stand back. You've got this puzzle in your head about how to run this trip effectively, and the next fact you're going to talk about, but just stand back and like look at what's happening in front of you and enjoy that moment. And there's a lot of those, but I keep coming back to my time at Bear Camp because I mean I spend potentially 2 to 3, even 4 months there on most summers. And one of my absolute favorite bears there is this bear named Roxy, and
Hmm.
she's got a young bear. We don't know if male or female because it's still fairly small, named Pebbles. And she's one of those bears that I've gotten to know over the years and got to see Pebbles grow up and understand them a lot. And she's very good at being comfortable around our groups because she knows we don't mean her any harm. To the point where if another big male bear, which can be potentially scary for her and her cub, she'll come closer to us and hang out right next to us so that big male doesn't come nearby. And so it's those moments of I get to stand there. I'm giving that trust to Roxy and Pebbles that they know we're not going to mean her any harm. I'm I'm helping protect my group, and my group is getting the photos they were hoping for because of this experience. It's definitely one of those pinch me moments of that kind of that trust and kind of unwritten communication between me as a person and then a wild animal like a bear. Never fully get to the point of anthropomorphizing and thinks that I'm friends with her or anything like that, but just understanding the language that she's giving me and understanding how we can make her comfortable in that moment. It's absolutely special. You've got a 600-pound bear staring at you and it doesn't care. Like you can't get anything better than that.
I love that, and it's something just to savor it in that moment. I am hoping, and I hope this with every episode that some listener finds us, or they've been listening to us over the years since we started the Outdoor Adventure series, is they get some piece of insight and an aha for themselves, like, my God, I want to do this, or this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm curious, what advice would you give one or more of our listeners about how to make that commitment to get out there? And maybe it's financially, it's not doable right now. Okay.
Mm.
And these types of experiences are like the experiences of a lifetime. So somewhere between getting started to that experience of a lifetime, what would your advice be to those individuals? Just take that first step somewhere, somehow, and get familiar. And hopefully someday I'm going to be taking you out. What would your advice be to our listeners?
Yeah, I think if you're interested in a career like this or working in this field, we benefit these days of just a vast amount of resources online. I mean, I, as a photographer, have grown a lot over the years just by watching other photographers. They've put out YouTube videos on the top 10 tips of wildlife photography in Africa or how to use your Sony camera. There's so many resources out there today that you can grow a lot just on your own. It's very easy to be self-taught in that regard. And so I highly recommend that is understanding where you want to be, start writing down what those pre requirements are, those skill sets that you need, and start teaching yourself all those using those resources. And that's going to get you most of the way. That'll get your door in with a smaller organization, and then you just keep building on that and moving up the ladder, so to speak, to bigger and bigger things.
Okay. Very good. Now, I have one last question. It's more of a personal question. I know you and your wife just had a baby.
Yeah.
Baby's rather young. Maybe it's not ready to go on an first excursion. Maybe it already has. But at what point do you allow it to crawl around and pick up a rock and see what's underneath?
Oh, as soon as he's able, absolutely. I mean, I live in Arizona, so we have to think about scorpions and rattlesnakes and
Yeah.
even cactus spines on the ground. So it'll be
Yeah.
monitored closely. But I'm hoping to instill this curiosity in him because I mean, at the end of the day, that's where my little spark throughout this whole career of mine has started, is that curiosity for the natural world. And I want to be able to give that to him. And so as soon as it's possible, I mean, already I'm walking him around and pointing at the dogs we see at the park and the birds that fly by. And he saw his first snake at like 2.5 months that just slithered into a bush while we were at a friend's house. So there's all those things that, I mean, he's still at this point so young. I don't know how much he's experiencing, but getting him out there so that when that finally clicks as he's developing, it'll just be second nature for him to be out there. It's definitely as soon as possible. If
Excellent.
I can take him up to bear camp and he can grow up every summer amongst the bears, I will definitely be doing that.
I love that. And it's puts a whole new meaning to bring your child to work day. I love that.
Absolutely.
I love it. Now, I know we just spent a little time up on the website, but just if you wouldn't mind, if our listeners would like to learn more about yourself, Nat Hab, and your work, where are the best places to go?
Yeah. So Natural Habitat Adventures, you can find us at nathab.com. That's nathab.com. If you're interested in my work in photography, you can find me at mikehillmanmedia.com.
Excellent. And we'll provide the backlinks to both those sites as well as to the social sites for Nat Hab as well on Facebook and Instagram. Mike, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast and just kind of hearing about your story, your journey, and this really great stories and sharing these wonderful photos and the offerings that your organization has to offer. And I just think Natural Habitat Adventures, it's got to be a go-to and just try to figure out a way to do it because we've got to get out there and explore, and there's just wonderful ways to do it. So really appreciate you sharing about yourself and this wonderful organization. So appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Howard.
All right. Listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a real quick close and you and I can have a final chat. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Mike Hillman. He's Photo Expeditions Director for Natural Habitat Adventures. I don't know about you, but well, my credit cards probably can't handle this, but I have got to find some way to get out on one of these adventures. I mean, when I saw that photo of the elephant and the Northern Lights, I'm thinking that's my bucket list. Though I did see the photo of the Alaska Railroad, and I was on there back in I forget what it was, maybe like the early 2000s. I took a vacation up there and literally saw Denali every day. So as Mike was sharing some of these stories, it definitely resonated for me. Now, listen, we're going to provide a lot of information about this episode up on our show notes. There's some media that Mike also shared with us. We'll have those up on our website as well. We'll have backlinks to the Nat Hab website, Mike's website, as well as the Facebook and Instagram pages. And so a lot of opportunities for you to at least begin exploring and taking that next step on your photographic adventure that you've got waiting for you. Now, as for us, you can find this episode on our website, theoutdooradventureseries.com. Mike's going to share a couple photos with us, and we'll have a couple collages up on the website in addition to the show notes. We're also going to be on links to our Outdoor Adventure Series page on LinkedIn and Facebook. The YouTube video of this episode will also be up on obviously YouTube, and we'll have the tour, the whole episode, including the tour of the website that Mike took us on. And of course, you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. And remember, we love likes, comments, and sharing. And we really hope you enjoy this episode. So do let us know what you think, okay? So until next time, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we look forward to having you join us on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care.